topic today that I wanted to discuss, and this topic is on the religion for black people. So, what is the religion for black people? If you are on social media at all, you will see that people are saying that religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, are not religions for African American people or black people, period, whether you're from Africa or the continent of Africa or any country on the globe. They're saying it is not the religion for African Americans, for Africans, or people of African origin. So today I wanted to discuss that, see if I can explain this and explain why our religion is not only the religion for African Americans, for Africans, but for all people. There are people who have a voice in the African American community which speak disparagingly about Al-Islam, and I thought it was my duty to equip Africans, African Americans, and all people with the knowledge and understanding of Al-Islam and how we can defend against this attack on Al-Islam, because some of them are doing it explicitly, saying Al-Islam is not a religion for African Americans, and other people are doing it overtly. So, or covertly. Some doing it overtly, some doing it covertly. So we want to make sure that this is addressed. So the first thing, or the first requisite of proof or of evidence of why a religion is for African Americans, for black people, for all people, is that it is true. The second supporting evidence should be that it is true. The third thing should be that it is true, that the religion is true, that the philosophy, that the ideology is true. The fourth one is that it should be effective to change our condition. And the fifth one should be that it is true. So the most important thing, in my view, in anyone's view who is rational and reasonable, is that the religion be true. Not that it was used by people to perform something that is incorrect, something that is wrong, something that is mischievous, something that is heinous, something that is barbaric, but that it is true. And when this is the case, there are few, if any, religions that stand in opposition to Al-Islam. So the first thing I wanted to do was create a chart of some things, two things in particular that I think are the requisites for truth. Since I said 1, 2, 3, and 5 should be that it is true. All right? So the first thing is that God is one. Now, if in any study of the African indigenous religions, we find that monotheism was what they were founded upon. Monotheism was not something that was evolved. It devolved into polytheism. And then the religion of Al-Islam and the religion of the prophets of God are the ones who brought it back to monotheism, or the belief in one God. Now the logic, the reasoning in that is one God is something that would require another talk. What I can suggest is that we would rather have one Lord or one ruler or one person, one being who is in charge than multiple. It is rather difficult to have multiple masters than one master. As the Quran says, the universe is, if it were more than one God, the universe would be in chaos. That would be because multiple gods would be reigning over their multiple facets of their lordship. Whether it was the sun, the moon, the stars, the ocean, the god of the ocean would be in contrast to the god of the sun and the god of the moon. But that they are in one, they are together in one, is proof of the one governor, that is God. So with that being said, the second criteria is that this religion is all-encompassing. It encompasses not just black people, but all people. And when this is implemented, other religions are vanquished relatively immediately. All right? So we have here Hinduism. Now, mind you, Hinduism is the name that was given to this group of religions, which was called initially the Eternal Teachings, but the British combined all their different beliefs together. Hinduism means the religion or the belief system of the Indus people. So the people from India, this is their belief system. Now we know initially that they had one God, Brahman, but then that one God is divided into three, a triune God, which is Vishnu, which is Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. So again, initially there is not one God. And after the three gods, Vishnu incarnates 9 or 10 other times. So all of those things would negate that from being a truly monotheistic religion. In that there was one God who is unknowable. And then the other three are the god of wrath, the god of healing. I can't remember the other gods, but I mean the different titles that they have and the different things that they're lord over. But then within that, Vishnu also reincarnated. So one God is already taken out of this one. In terms of it being an all-inclusive religion, this religion is for the Indus people. This is the reason it is not a proselytizing religion. They don't teach other people about Hinduism. If you want to know about it, you can learn, but they don't go around telling people to come become Hindus. So that right there negates this religion. Buddhism, which came out of Hinduism, Buddha was an Indian monk. So from that religion, there is almost no talk about God at all. They don't tell you who was the creator or why you're on this earth, which is primarily the question that anyone who is inquisitive about God and about their existence asks. So almost immediately, that one is taken out of the picture. Buddhism, again, since it came from Hinduism, would reject the idea of being all-inclusive. However, it is, because Buddha rejected the caste system, which was a racist system. So, in fact, they are somewhat of a proselytizing religion. You rarely ever see them proselytizing, but they do offer that religion to other people. So it is all-inclusive, but whether it's one God is not known. First, Buddha didn't talk about God. You can be an atheist Buddhist, so you can not believe in God at all and still be a Buddhist. Because the goal is to attain the ability to accept your existence and the suffering in your existence and ultimately attain nirvana, which has nothing to do with God. So here again, both of these religions are discarded. Now, Zoroastrianism, what is a monotheistic religion? However, it accounts for a duality in that it has a belief in evil and good as if they are dueling systems, as if the devil is the antithesis of God, as if he is the arch enemy of God. When al-Islam, obviously, he is the enemy of human beings. He is not on the level of God at all, but he is God's creation. And we are even superior to the devil. So in that instance, they do believe in one God. However, the religion began in Persia. So it is a religion that is permeated in Persia, and it's named after the prophet of that Persian of that time, Zoroaster. So again, it is not all encompassing. That's the reason you don't have several people or people who are Zoroastrians or who proselytize in that Zoroastrianism, because it is a religion that is relegated to that region. Judaism obviously is a religion and a belief in one God. How they perceive that God is quite different. So in terms of their belief as a whole, if you ask them, do they believe in one God, they would suggest yes. But if you read their scriptures, it suggests something different. But since they suggest that they are a belief in one God, I won't delve into whether they actually believe in one God. Their first commandment is don't have any gods before their God, which would insinuate that they had other gods. They said their God is God over the other gods. We don't have that. We don't have it where there are other gods and our God is supreme. There is only one God in Islam. Nothing else is God. But the second part of that is that it is not all-inclusive. Judaism is a religion that you are born into, right? So it is not all-inclusive at all, and that's the reason why it is such an old religion. just as Zoroastrianism is and Hinduism is, but they're not proselytizing. They don't ask other people to become Buddhists, Zoroastrians, or Hindus, right? They believe that you are born of a certain line, and that is how you attain your religious affiliation. Still, yeah, that didn't work. Okay, I spelled Judaism wrong, but anyway. The next one is Christianity, which is again a belief in one God. Ultimately, they are amongst the monotheistic religions. However, the bulk of them, the majority of them believe in a triune God, just as the Hindus does. So they believe that God was three. He was the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and he incarnated into a human being named Jesus. Now, the funny part is that when you talk about Hinduism to a Christian, they would suggest that it's preposterous to believe that Vishnu reincarnated into 9 different beings, one of which was a boar, the other one was a tortoise, but the other one were human beings. Yet they believe that God reincarnated just one time in Jesus, but not that he reincarnated 9 times. In fact, there are Hindus who believe that Jesus was the 10th incarnation of Vishnu. So they accept all these incarnations. So again, they don't believe in monotheism in the strictest sense, that there is one God and nothing else that is God. In fact, in Christianity, the devil is called the God of this world. In Psalms, it says, ye are gods. So it is suggesting that there are multiple gods, even though they are smaller, and then there's one supreme God. Again, in Al-Islam, there is no smaller gods. There is just Allah. He is one God, and nothing else is him or close to him. The next thing we have is African spiritualism. Now, this is something that is encompassing of all the religions of that continent. So there are vast differences, but as I suggested, monotheism is what is the epicenter of all of their spirituality. They believe in one God. So they believe in one God, and from there, throughout time, they also believe that it is all-encompassing, or that other people are able to accept their religion. So when the Greeks came there, they were fine with them accepting the African spirituality or the African indigenous religions. Not necessarily that they proselytized them, but it was all-encompassing in that they could adhere to those religions as well. They didn't have to be of African descent in order to believe in them. And ultimately, again, Al-Islam believes in one God without any partners, without any associates, without any sons, mothers, brothers, fathers, any of that. And it is an all-encompassing, which means anyone can be a Muslim, or one who submits their will to the will of God. But not only that, is anything can. And the same is true about African spiritualism. So that African spiritualism believed that there are spirits or something living inside of inanimate objects. Now, that is to say, the science may have been primitive in that they believed that there were spirits in other in inanimate objects, but we too believe that the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets are praising God by doing what God wants it to do. It is submitting its will to God. So when the planets orbit in the solar system and they orbit the sun, when the sun is on this when the sun is rotating in its orbit, when the grass is growing, when the plants are growing, and when the trees or when the birds and the ants move and do as they do, they are all in a state of submission of God. So these two here are in close proximity to each other. The difference is in something that I'll get into in a little bit. Hold on. So there's a distinction between spirituality and religion. So it's called different things. The African religion is called spirituality, then it's called the indigenous religions. This is because there are all these countries within that continent, and they try to put them all together and say, and try to make something, because there's no name explicitly for each of these different religions or each of these different belief systems. But in order to categorize them, they call them the indigenous religions. And people today have fancied the name African spirituality. Now, spirituality is something that comes from religion. It is something that people have now used as a means to avoid religion. So spirituality, as specifically what it is known today, is something that emphasizes individualism, when that is not what religion is sought for. Religion is something that is encompassing not just the individual, but everyone as a whole. So spirituality would not be able to have 3 million people make a pilgrimage to one specific land. Spirituality by itself would not be able to have 2 billion people praying in the same direction towards each other. Spirituality, individual spirituality, is what is being promoted today. Is that we decide for ourselves what is true and what is right. So everyone, all 7 billion people on earth, have their own different spirituality, and they determine what is true, what is right, and what is wrong. Now, obviously, when we do that individually, we cannot be collective, and we will make rules and laws that adhere to us and to our own interests, our own self-interest. If I was the person who make all the rules and laws, I would make rules and laws that benefit me and my family and people who look like me or people who I like. The only being that is able to make laws and rules that is not affected by those rules and laws is God. He is the only one that can make rules and laws that would not be beneficial, because rules and laws cannot benefit or harm him. And since he is the creator of all things, he understands humanity, he understands all of the circumstances, all of the situations that we would be in, so he is best to determine what our rules and laws might be. So what is happening here is that people say they don't like religion. Now Christians have fancy saying, I don't have a religion, I have a relationship. Some, as if a relationship bars you from having a religion or having a belief system in do's and don'ts. The difference is a Muslim is not afraid of saying we have a religion, but not only do we have a religion, that encompasses our every action, how we get married, how we die, how we eat food. It encompasses everything. So the problem here, though, is that they don't acknowledge the truth in that they do have a religion. Everyone does. Even if you don't believe in God, you have a religion. Your religion is whatever your name is. If your name is Sally, it's Sallyism. If it's John, it's Johnism. Because any thinking person has a system or has an ideology of do's and don'ts. No matter who that person is. As long as you are a thinking person, you think this is the right thing to do and this is the wrong thing to do. So even with African spirituality, they don't have per se a written tradition in any of those African indigenous religions. Now, I just read a book on monotheism in African indigenous religions. And this person clearly was an Afrocentrist. He was also an African spiritualist. He did not adhere to any of the Abrahamic religions. And when I was reading the book, I could tell that something was missing. He was saying that all of them throughout every continent in Africa, throughout every country in the continent, believed in one God. And they had different attributes for that God. And they had similar practices that they performed when they prayed, when they gave sacrifices, all those things to that God. But he didn't say how they all knew how they all had the same practices, how they all had the same beliefs. The reason is he didn't understand in Revelation. He in fact used the word revealed over and over again, but he didn't understand that God revealed it to prophets in each of those countries, and that's how they all got the same practices. That's how they all learned the same things. And that's why all the religions, even these religions, the commonality is that God gave prophets to all of these different people. That's why we have the golden rule in every single religion. Do unto people as you want done to yourself. Because God gave prophets to every single nation, to every people. And they don't understand that. So reading the book is funny to me how I can see what he is missing and why he is missing it. So again, the African indigenous religions today, in Africa right now, roughly 47–48% of Africans are Muslims. 46–47% are Christian. Less than 10% are of the indigenous religions. So if these indigenous religions were so potent, so true, why are they in the extreme minority? Why couldn't they stand the test of time? I read one book which was talking about the African slaves and when they were transported from Africa into the Americas. They said Al-Islam was the religion that could withstand deportation. You can move it from here to there and they would still believe in Al-Islam. But the same was not true for the African indigenous religions. In fact, before slavery began, the Spaniards brought missionaries to Africa and they tried to teach them Christianity. And the people who were overwhelmingly accepting to them were the people of African industrial religions. The people who did not want to hear it, who did not believe it, were Muslims. Now, the reason that is because, okay, let me start with what's going on today. There are people who say that the religions, the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Al-Islam were the parent or the children of the African indigenous religions, particularly Egyptian religions. Because Egypt was so civilized, or Kemet was so civilized, they suggest that the only thing that could possibly happen was they stole this from the Kemites and then they adapted their religion and then adapted on and on. So Judaism is seen as the child, and then Christianity is seen, or Judaism is seen as the child, and then Christianity is seen as the grandchild, and then Al-Islam is the great-grandchild. So from there is a progression. So they suggest that this was stolen from the Kemites, or from the Kemetic understanding. Now the issue with that is that it would suggest some illegitimacy to Judaism, to Christianity, and to Al-Islam. But this is only from people who have this new form of internet scholarship. They don't read actual scholarship. In other words, they see a picture or see another picture and say, this is the truth, without reading what the scholars are actually saying about those topics. For example, what was the scholar's name? Let's see, for example, his name is Sheikh Anta Diop, one of the leading anthropologists, historians, and Egyptologists. He says, African religions, more or less forgotten, were in the process of anthropathy, which means dying, and being emptied of their spiritual content, their former deep metaphysics. The jumble of empty forms that they left behind could not compete with Islam on the moral or rational level. And it was on the latter level of the rationality that the victory of Islam was more striking. So in other words, the African indigenous religions could not compete with Al-Islam, it said, on a moral and a rational level. This is what the leading scholar of Egyptology said, and anthropology, and the historians. So how could it be suggested that Islam is illegitimate and these religions, or the indigenous religions, are better? What they suggest, what scholars suggest, is that Africans see Al-Islam and Christianity and Judaism as African religions. What they don't understand is that it is an evolution that is happening, that is taking place here. The indigenous religions believed in one God. It would be as if someone is walking now, and then you go to a place where they're all walking, and then you bring a car. Obviously, they would accept the car. They were like, well, we can go faster, we can go further in a car. So that's the reason why the people of the indigenous religions accepted Christianity and ultimately are accepting Al-Islam in such great numbers, because they realized what they believed in was true, and then it is being expounded upon. So when they believed in the one God, and they believed that these inanimate objects are making a praise to God, they realized when they see the Quran that this is exactly what we already believed, but it takes it further. So in terms of the spirituality in Egypt, right? So they have this thing called the Mayat laws. See if I can pull this up real quick. Now the Mayat laws were the laws 42 negations. So they're negative laws. They're saying, I did not do this, or I have not done this. Now, they don't have, it was not a written, they don't have a written codified system of religion. So everything that they were taught was oral. And this is because everybody wasn't literate at that time. The only literacy began more prevalent, after the advent of Christianity and then al-Islam. Literacy became more prevalent, and it would not be a coincidence that the Quran is the last revelation sent to mankind, because literacy is so prevalent and we have the ability of copying the scriptures over and over again, so they'll have lasting effect. But when you have a tradition that is oral, ultimately it will be forgotten or mistaken. And this is the same case with the Maya laws. Because it was written down and so few people could read or write, several of them say different things. So some of them, when they're catering to a certain person, whether he was a fighter or a warrior, would say something slightly different. But ultimately, these are what basically what they say in their spirit and when they're all connected together. So I'm going to read them to you. It says, number one is, I have not committed sin. Number two is, I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men or women. I have not stolen grain. I have not uttered lies. I ain't gonna go through all 42 of them, but ultimately they are rules and laws, do's and don'ts of what you are to do and what you are not to do. So people, even today, though they say they don't believe in do's and don'ts, actually believe in do's and don'ts. Now, Maya was a goddess of harmony, a goddess of truth. As I suggested, Egypt believed initially in one God, and then they used the attributes of God and started worshiping them individually. So if God, the creator, is the creator of all things, he would also be the God of truth. You don't need a goddess of truth. You don't need a goddess of light. You don't need a goddess of love or whomever. So what they did was, these Maya laws is laws dedicated and are said for this goddess of truth. But ultimately, they are rules and laws, and they are implemented in the Quran and more. Before, in the Jewish tradition, there's something called the Noachide laws. These are 7 laws that was given to Adam and up into everyone up until Noah. Peace be upon both of them. And these laws read, I did not deny God, I did not blaspheme, I did not murder, I did not engage in illicit sexual relations, I did not steal, I did not eat a live animal, and I established a legal system to ensure obedience to said laws. And then it evolved into the 10 Commandments and ultimately into the 613 laws and rules. Now they believe here, as I said, this religion has become one in which people have to be born into religion. So they're saying these 7 rules apply to everyone else, and the 613 laws apply to us. But al-Islam and Muslims, when they see these laws and the laws of the 42 laws of Maya, we realize that these are all encompassing. All of them are in al-Islam and more. Because like I said, if you were walking and then someone had a bicycle and then someone had a motorcycle and then they had a car, al-Islam is the car. It is the perfected version of everything they already believed. All of them believed in al-Islam, and then they perverted it. And they said there are multiple gods. Or they said that Jesus was God. Or they said Krishna was God. Or they said, God, you don't think about God, just worry about nirvana. All these things were the reason that they have a commonality is because they are all al-Islam and they have deviated. And this is why Allah continued to bring prophet after prophet to different people to attribute and to establish the truth. So again, the religion that is for black people, the religion that is for all mankind, is al-Islam. And I also wanted to mention how these scholars, who are Afrocentric scholars, who are scholars who have dedicated their lives to the study of African religions, African spirituality, they were Muslims, Jews, and Christians. When today, the people who are internet scholars saying don't accept Christianity, don't accept Judaism, don't accept al-Islam, they didn't accept Egyptology. They don't believe in the Kemite laws. None of them do. Not the internet scholars and not the scholars of the actual scholars, the scholarly people who taught in universities like Cornell and Harvard University, people who are real scholars. So these internet scholars, or these people who suggest they have some knowledge that we need to listen to, none of them are actually following the rules and laws that they say they are. they are in fact themselves hypocrites. If they believe that the Kemite laws were so superior, they should be following them themselves. They should listen to Osiris and Isis, and they should be praying to the god of the Maya god, right? But they don't, because they are aware that Al-Islam is superior to this, but they want to give you spirituality, individualism, where you do what you want to, where you decide what the rules and laws are. So all of us believe what is true and what is false, what is good, what is right, and what is wrong. And ultimately, we are going in different directions. Again, spirituality can't combine people as Al-Islam does. So Dr. Ben, who is a popular Afrocentrist and scholar, has been mentioned several times, and he wrote a book, is We the Black Jews, right? So his name itself talks about the lineage of black Israelites. The same is true of the doctor that I mentioned earlier, Ansar Diab. He was a Muslim. And Dr. Ben writes in his book, The African Origin of Major Western Religion, he says, I shall show that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are as much African or as they are Asian, and in no sense whatsoever are they European. Because at this time, it was called Western religions, whether it was Christianity, Al-Islam, or Judaism. But as I said, these African scholars and Africans themselves view these religions as African in origin, because initially everything, human beings, humanity itself, and all religions came from Africa. So if Adam is our true father, and Adam, he came from Africa, then he was learning and teaching Al-Islam, right? In its inception, and only thing that happened was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam perfected this religion. So ultimately, this was Al-Islam in its different stages, and it was perfected with Prophet Muhammad. It was not began with him. So it can't be the stepchild of any other religion. In fact, Dr. Ben was saying how even the understanding in Kemite came from these African indigenous religions, and then they evolved and ultimately evolved into something that we have today. And finally, it's always a topic of provocation when we talk about the slave trade and about slavery. Now, this is one of the things that is used by people who are anti-Islam, who are Afrocentrists, who talk about slavery and the slave trade, and saying how this religion isn't for African Americans, isn't for African people. Now again, I would suggest to you that the importance of something, or the truthfulness of something, has nothing to do with the people who adhere to the religion and do things outside of the religion. So if I say that I'm a Muslim and I sell drugs, you can't attribute that to Al-Islam, you attribute that to me. The same way if I'm a Christian or Buddhist or whomever, there are Buddhists right now who are killing Muslims, right? They are massacring them. But we don't suggest that Buddha taught to massacre Muslims. So in the same sense, Al-Islam does not, though the Arabs were slave traders, in fact they were slave traders before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ever born. So we can't say this is Islamic slave trade. It was the Arab slave trade of African American people, but Al-Islam, again, has no disparity or has no distinction between black people, white people, Asian people, any of those people. So to suggest that you can't accept Al-Islam because Arabs, even before Prophet Muhammad and after him, had slaves, is to be disingenuous, particularly when Africans had slaves. The Kemetic people had slaves. So if we are to suggest that Christianity is false because they had slaves, when in fact there were people who were Christians, there were Amish who considered themselves Christian, who were abolitionists. The abolitionists themselves were using Christianity as a means to fight against slavery. So to suggest that Christianity and slavery are something that is intertwined and they can't be pulled apart is something that is false, in the same sense of Al-Islam. If that is the case, then you are also saying that all indigenous African religions are also false under the same pretenses. So again, Al-Islam does not promote the persecution of people. In fact, Al-Islam is the antithesis of it. In fact, it says oppression is worse than death. Oppression is worse than slaughter. It is better for you to fight and die than to live a life of submission. So this is the reason that they didn't want slaves to continue being Muslims. This is the reason that they fought and tried to break them, and it took hundreds of years to break them out of this cycle. In fact, there was laws made for slaves, made to suggest any slaves who were from African descent, they could not come to America because they were riling other slaves up, saying to fight against the slave masters. They realizing that they're slaves, they are servants to nothing but God, no human beings, made them want to fight and persevere. And when we look back at all the revolts, African Muslims were people who were at the forefront, who were spearheading these things, or were in some form of leadership in these roles. If you look at Amistad, if you look at the revolts that were done in Brazil, it is all because of the spirit of Al-Islam. So again, Al-Islam, in conjunction with Africans, made the golden age for Al-Islam. We African Muslims are the only group of people who invaded Europe and conquered it for 800 years. So the combination of them two together is so potent, and this is the reason why we must understand and accept Al-Islam. Assalamu alaikum. Any questions? What are you saying?
So, as far as the trans-Saharan slave trade is concerned, the Arabs in their conquest of the majority of Eastern Africa and Northern Africa in some instances, are you suggesting that they didn't use Islam as a vehicle by way to enslave Africans?
I am suggesting that they actually did. Now, the northern and eastern part of Africa oppression was used in order for them to subjugate them and teach Al-Islam. But the large majority of people who became Muslims was on their own cognition. They decided to accept Al-Islam, particularly because of in trades with other Arabs. So I don't want to suggest that Arabs are all bad people. Again, in the same way that there were Christians that was fighting against slavery, there were Muslims who were doing the same thing. When they had slavery in what is now Iraq, there was a Muslim brother named Muhammad Ali, I believe his name was, who was an Arab Muslim who helped the revolt, which is one of the most brutal revolts in history, and he was fighting against Muslims, Arab Muslims, to help free African slaves. So it's not to suggest that all Arabs are evil or any people are evil, but to suggest that the religion is the reason. Because even as you suggested, they made them Muslims, right? In order to do so, they would have to. Some of them that they made Muslims. In teaching them, they made them almost superior to them, because once they start understanding Al-Islam, they realize that I'm actually more moral than you are. And the same thing is true in America. The African Muslim slaves felt superior to the Christian slavers, because they realized, I know I'm more moral than you. We can't do this to other people, and you are doing it, and you're doing it perpetually. You're not stopping doing it. So it's a poison almost to give a person who has subjugated Islam, because it's going to bite you back. It's like having a snake in the house. Ultimately, it will attack you. So they did a disservice to themselves in doing so. The Arabs, for the most part, the Arabs that were doing this oppression were doing it for their own personal gain, for gain of power, for gain of wealth, just like anyone else performed slavery. And they saw Africans as less than. The ones that did that obviously did. In order to make someone a slave and subjugate them for generations, you have to see them as less than you, which is something that is totally against Al-Islam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the end, his last sermon said, a black person is not better than a white person, an Arab is not better than a non-Arab. The only thing that separates us is piety, is righteousness, whether one is more righteous than the other person. Any other questions? I know y'all came in at the end.
I came in kind of at the end. I apologize for being late. So, okay, so if we can't attribute, because I remember reading about the history of the trans-Saharan slave trade and its effects, primarily in Eastern Africa or whatnot. I keep emphasizing that. But I remember reading where early in that that era, that the Arabs would legitimately would not allow for their slaves to take shahada. I don't know if you've read that before. Have you ever read that before?
I would not be surprised in that because, as I said, having al-Islam or having a slave who is a Muslim is something that you don't want. And early slavers realized that. I mean, they made a law. The king and queen made a law saying, don't bring Muslims here. They're going to cause a bunch of problems. They won't listen to us. So I'm sure the Arabs at that time realized that making Africans who are already naturally strong, like you can't, and then you also give them a religion that says rebel against your oppressor. It says oppression is worse than death, meaning you fight until you die. You don't let someone make you a slave. You know what I mean? So you don't want to teach somebody a religion that teaches them to do that. You want to teach them a religion that subjugates them, that makes them think it's okay, it's natural for them to be slaves. And while I'm saying that, it reminded me of, there were some Arabs who were teaching from the Bible about Noah, teaching that they were the sons of Ham, so it's okay for them. So they even used a doctrine that they didn't believe in order to subjugate them. That shows that they were disingenuous, that they were lying. In order to say, it's like, well, I'm gonna use the Bible then so I can help prove that y'all should be slaves. You know what I mean? Why don't you use the Quran? What Muslim proves something using the Bible unless they're doing it disingenuously?
So what do you think are some key factors in understand that rouse a person's spirit to not want to be a slave?
I think the primary one is that Abdullah, is that you are a servant of nothing but Allah. And I think also the aspect of learning and researching. I think without, the story of Frederick Douglass, and that when he learned how to read and write, he realized that he was not fit to be a slave. When you realize that you have more to life, that you have a purpose, and your purpose isn't to pick cotton, isn't to pick tobacco, or to follow the whims of what another person says, then it's impossible for you to be a slave. It's not that al-Islam commands people to be knowledgeable, to research, and to submit to none but Allah. It's one verse in the Quran, I can't remember right now. I think I had it in my book that was talking about don't be a servant or a slave to or subject to anyone but Allah. So with that and the idea, and then the Western Africans, many of them were so in tune with the Quran that they memorized it. So they knew every verse backwards and forward. So it was practically impossible to make them good slaves. You know what I mean? It had to be beaten out of them for generation and generation in order for that to be the case. I think also just the fighting spirit. The Quran says the person who stays at home is not like the person who goes out and fights. I mean, and the Quran explicitly says to fight. I mean, it was like they are being subjugated by the Meccans. They're coming to kill them. They try to kill the Prophet. They try to kill his family. They torture them. And Allah is saying to the believers, don't be afraid. I'm with you. This is a religion that says fight oppression. You know what I mean? And so in that sense, no matter what the odds are, you are going to win. And it says if you die trying, don't say that they are dead, because they will be rewarded. That spirit can't allow you to be subjugated to someone else, and can't allow you to be afraid. When you realize that the God of the universe told you to fight these people, they're just regular people, no matter what arms they have. You know what I mean? Once you get down to it, they're a human being just like you are, and Allah is in control of all things. So he can make their missiles turn around and shoot them. And it says, if you have 1,000, if they have 1,000, you have 100. Because you have the angels helping you, so you gonna win one way or another, whether it's here or in the hereafter. But you're not gonna, I thought the Indians, or I hate to say Indians, the Native Americans had it correct, and you're not gonna make me a slave, I'm gonna die. But I'm not, that's the reason that slavery lasted so long for us was because they taught us and we believed in Christianity, or in the Christianity that they wanted to teach us. You know what I mean? That it was natural for us to be slaves. That's the only way you can make somebody subjugated for that long. You have to convince them that this is the right thing. And your kids, because I have children, right? I would not want my kids to grow up in that way. The only way that I can see my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids growing up that way is if you mentally break me and make me think that God wants me to do this. Because we are such a God-fearing people, that's the only way you can make a whole group of people believe anything, is you say, God ordained you to be this way. And then, even then, Nat Turner, when he read the Bible, he realized, listen, that's not even true, you know what I mean? Like, so ultimately, education and learning will ultimately make you unfit to be a slave, anyone's slave. Any other questions?
I keep going.
I know you got a lot to say, brother.
I filled up, you know what I'm saying? I got a lot of gas. So like, do you think, as far as African Americans are concerned, and I was sojourning American, how you explain how we was conditioned to be that way, our acceptance of Islam as a group of people, do you think over the course of 100 years, because it's been almost 100 years since we've kind of been exposed to this idea of Islam, re-exposed to this idea of Islam, do you think that we're going in that direction of liberating ourselves mentally as well as physically?
I'm back and forth on that question. I think that we are still mentally slaves. I see videos all the time about new converts to Al-Islam, right? And we are the largest forms of reverts, I would suggest, of Al-Islam, and they're always of Caucasian, male or female. I think that African Americans don't value Al-Islam like they should, and they value the opinions of white people more than they do of African Americans. And until that is broken, we will still be subject to all kinds of discrimination and feeling inferior, and feeling that the religion that we were before we came here was inferior to Western ideals. When in fact, I just saw something yesterday that evangelical Christians, white Christians, are dwindling. They are in the decline in Western society just because they know it's not true. They know that God is not white, right? They know that Jesus is not white, and they know everybody in this book is not white. They are black and brown people. But I don't think African Americans also realize the potency of Al-Islam. They don't realize that once they become Muslims, half of their burden is taken away from them. Half of the stigmas that they have. You already have a problem. You poor, right? But then you smoke and drink and party and do all kinds of other things. Once you stop doing those things, all you got is the problem now is that you're poor. Now you got to work on that. But you can't work on it when you're drunk and high and buying lottery tickets. Once you get a religion, and God told you to stop doing this, so stop doing this, right? And then you can work on that. But until we do that, that's the problem right there, is that we adhere to the Christianity that says do nothing, just believe Jesus is coming. That's the other reason why it took so long. We had a sister who was in Yama, who was from Ethiopia, and she was talking about the huge difference of Ethiopian Christianity and the Christianity that is taught here. She said there's almost no difference in Al-Islam and Ethiopian Christianity, in that they adhere to some of the same rules and laws, and it's something that is practiced daily. It's not something that you practice on Sunday, or something in which you wait for Jesus to come and then heal all of your problems. So if they realize that if African Americans realize the potency of what they can possess, until then, they won't be able to make a huge difference. I think what Imam W.D. Muhammad said is true, is that we have the ability to save America. America is sick, right? But we have the cure. The problem is we don't believe in the religion. We believe in something different from that. But if we understand its superiority, its truthfulness, before you got here, that's what I was talking about. This actual whole talk was about what is the religion for black people. Because there are people who suggest that Al-Islam is not a religion for African American people. If they understand the potency of Al-Islam, then they will be able to make changes. But until then, they won't. Just to recap, is that these religions here I was talking about, in any religion, I was suggesting that if it's a religion for black people, it should be a religion for all people. But the two primary things that it should be focusing on is God is one, and that is all encompassing. When you do those things, almost none of the religions still stand up to Al-Islam, or stand up, period. Because most of them don't believe in a strict monotheism. There is some intermediate God, there is some smaller God, there is the God of this world and the God of the hereafter, and or something to that effect. When Al-Islam says there is only one God, there is no God of this world, there is no smaller gods, there is no medium-sized gods, there is just God, and then everything else is his creation. Half of them fall. And then the other one are religions that are not only time-bound, but nationality-bound, or they are bound to a certain region in the world. And this is on their own. They've decided, some of them have decided to do this on their own. And I still suggest that the commonality in all of these religions is that the prophets were sent to all of these religions, and then they deviated from them. They caused themselves to stray or believe in multiple gods when it was nothing but the one true God. And then but for the most part, they use the attributes of God to believe in those individually. And then they believed that God was something other than the supreme being. They believed that he was a human being. And in doing so, you would relegate God to more than one. If he is a human being, or as Hindus said, he was one time a tortoise or a boar, or he was Vishnu, or he was Krishna or Rama, or all those things. Even if he was, that means God was right here, right? He was this size. A human being is only capable of knowing a certain amount of things, right? So if he was a human being, that means his knowledge was limited. If God's knowledge was limited, he can't be God, because God can't change, right? He can't be limited and unlimited. He can't be mortal and immortal. You can't be able to kill him and unable to kill him simultaneously. If you have a bottle of water, right, you can't put an ocean inside of it. In the same way, you can't put all the knowledge of everything ever inside of a human being. You can't put the power of everything else inside of a human being or inside of the universe. If the universe had the ability or the capacity to hold all of the power of God, it would explode. The power to do everything that can be done can't be compressed into a universe or a human being or anything that we can imagine. That's why the Quran said he is unimaginable. He's nothing like anything you can imagine. I think I was talking about this yesterday. Last week, is that we can be godly, but we can't be God-like. We can't be like God. We can do things if we want to be. God is the truth, and everything he says is the truth. We can speak truth. We can speak haq, but we are not the haq. We're not al-haq. We can't be the most merciful. We can't be merciful. You know what I mean? People name themselves that, but you can't be the merciful. There was a person I know who said his name was the wisdom. Like, you can't be the most wise. You can't be the wisest being. You don't know everything. You can be wise. You know what I mean? So as God is all encompassing of everything there is to know, all the power there is, and that can't be personified in a human being, in any of his creation, only in the Creator. Any more questions? All right, Assalamu alaikum. Can't believe my baby went to sleep. He was heckling me last week.